It is Pushpin with Wah 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 from the self-titled second EP, which is out now. I'm John Kennedy from Tape Notes and X-Posure on Radio X, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to Fake Notes, which is the new concept that we put together for the second EP by Pushpin. And of course, joining me are Lawrence, Ed, Arthur and Adam, who are collectively known as Pushpin. Thank you very much for setting this up and creating this opportunity to talk to you in depth about your music.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Well, I can't work out who's having who, because am I having you or you having me?
I think you agreed to us having you, I think is what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's exciting because, as you know, I'm a big fan of the band, and you've been in session on the show. I've played your music a lot on the radio, and I'm very excited about the new EP, which sounds fantastic. And I'm also excited to find out how you create this and how you manage the chaos, in a way, that is the wonderful world of Pushpin, and actually manage to contain it in some way that you can get it into a recording. And I think the first song we're going to look at is The Dance, which has a ridiculous amount of different things going on in it, and is a kind of a massive project, a big hit, but it's got everything and the kitchen sink.
I think Joe Futak, our producer, said it was the single biggest Pro Tools project he'd ever done, which I think when we were doing it was amazing. We were throwing like kitchen sinks, kitchen baths, toilet sinks, all of the sinks and baths were thrown at it. And then kind of when we were reducing it down, like mixing it, all those sorts of things, it was the sad situation of actually having to cull a lot of things.
Right. So how many tracks do you think you had in all?
We were well north of 100. Joe, who might be joining us later, sent through bounces of all the stems. There's at least like 20 different bounce down stems of things, and some of those are like drum tracks, which will have probably got like at least 20 mics on them. So there's a lot. There's probably too much. I'm surprised his laptop didn't melt.
So before we dig into it, then, shall we have a blast of the master of the dance?
My sleeve of heart covers everything. My cat plays parts for the suffering. Show us the spirit, show us the spirit. When I close my eyes, all I see is what I know. I knew that you knew everything. Every show would feel like my reckoning. Show us the spirit, show us the spirit. When I close my eyes, all I see is what I know. Make me mad. Head, shoulders, knees and toes. I didn't jump then, but I would have jumped now. Waist deep in the middle brow.
Just a little taste of The Dance then by Pushpin. So much is going on in this fantastically joyous song. How did it start? What did it start with?
So we kind of had the vocal melody was kind of all there in that first session almost. Like we had it, but because it was just bashing drums over a pedal, we just slowly started adding things, like trying to figure out actually what was going on. And so we had that on the synth to begin with, because Adam was the only person in the room kind of hitting the synth, because I was just on the violin just bashing out literally just open strings. I was being very lazy. I'd see if I can find that actually, but we were just combining all of that, and then we realized as we did that, like sort of how you could amplify those sounds and melodies just through crazy different things. So that started initially with like just that really fat synth, and then started becoming, let's see what it sounds like on a trumpet. And then because the raw, like the core of the song is so simple, you can add a lot to it. So here's me just bashing a violin. So that's just, that's just open strings, not doing very much. And at the end it's still there, but I'm just making it sound even more spooky and gross.
I mean, I'm assuming, maybe wrongly or rightly, that you've got all these friends who play other kinds of instruments who you can rope in whenever you like.
Yeah, so we decided that we wanted to try lots of brass. So we had French horn, we had trombone, we had trumpet. And I think by this point we'd recorded the rest of the song, so it was already incredibly stacked up. We said to Joe, "Hey Joe, please could we record some more instruments on this?" So we went down to a church in very deep South London, and we had a whole afternoon of recording these sorts of things. So yeah, we arranged these brass parts and kind of layered them in, and then I think poor Joe had to find a way of actually making space for them in the mix.
So this is the brass, which got you can hear it's quite distorted. Wanted to make it sound massive, but you can kind of hear the church echo in that. And if you bring in...
Is that's the whole brass section, so that is French horn, trombone and trumpet?
Exactly, yeah, that's the whole brass section. And then we've got all sorts of other I'm just bringing the drums, and you're starting to get a feeling for the actual song underneath it. But we've got all sorts of crazy things in there as well. So we've got just some weird claps and drum machines kicking off. We've got sort of an orchestra of acoustic guitars kind of strumming away. And then on top of that, you've got all the sort of the roomy percussion that we just talked about. So, all those sounds of everyone bashing things in the room, yelling.
It must have been hard to produce for Joe to try and work out, well, how can I get that lead vocal to stand out when all this is going on, and it's also been recorded in a church at some point, and trying to get that balance right must have been very tricky.
We didn't make it easy for Joe. Each of these instruments as well is recorded from sort of 8 different angles in this church, and I think putting it all together in a way that sounds like a song, he did a very, 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 very good job, I think.
It's a really tricky thing. I mean, when you've been playing it live, it's more simple in that you don't have a big brass section, and you don't have all these things going on. You can't kind of multi-track yourselves. Although I'm sure you would try and do this, and kind of have multiples of Pushpin all playing at the same time, which is an exciting idea. But at the same time, it must be tricky because you've kind of created this version. And you also know that you can do a more stripped back, straight ahead version that you perform live, and trying to work out which is better, which do we go for, because you clearly like the idea of trying to make it as big as possible.
I think we had a live arrangement of this first, and then going into the studio, it frees you up to say, okay, well, there can be 15 of me on this recording if I want there to be. And I think it's the first time we've really had that opportunity properly, and we probably got carried away. But yeah, we definitely tried to then incorporate elements of the studio version back into the live version.
And do you think you'll ever have a chance to get the brass section on stage with you?
Hopefully. It's tough. I think we thought about it, but it's getting everyone in the same place at the same time is, as I'm sure you know, John, very difficult.
We're trying to pull something together for the Moth Club show we're doing in November on the 16th.
It's interesting. I mean, the ambition of the band in terms of what you're trying to achieve with your recordings at this stage on the second EP is massive, really. And you're trying to make it work, without a budget. In effect, I'm just thinking that further down the line, bands would think, oh well, we've got the budget now, we can have as many musicians as we like, and then we can play at the Royal Albert Hall, and we can do it. It'll be really easy because the money's there. But obviously, that's not quite the position you're in at the moment. But at the same time, you're still managing to achieve this, which is really impressive, and it still sounds fantastic.
I think it'd be a dangerous game to give us a big budget for an orchestra. I think it would be chaos. Yeah.
He says I want it now. Walk in, walk out. And deep in his soul he found a terrible hole that left him darkly feeling he was dreaming.
It is Walk In, Walk Out by Pushpin from the Pushpin EP, and the first thing we notice is that amazing bass line. Is that the starting point for the song?
Yeah, it was. It was essentially a couple of years ago, Arthur and I were living together in South London, and it was still sort of COVID time. We were locked in this flat, and I was listening a lot to a band called Elephant Jim from Taiwan. They're kind of a math rocky band, and their bassist, lead singer, does a lot of tapping on the bass, and I was sort of fascinated with that at that time. So I started to mess around with that, and I came up with this riff that was what you hear now, but about 5 times faster. And I was just kind of tapping it along, and it sounded kind of insane, but we began that slow process of, like, Arthur and I sat there working out, okay, how can we make this into an actual song? And over time it kind of, transformed into that.
Did you slow it down? Did you record yourself and slow it down, or did you just play slower when you were starting to develop the song?
I think it was a suggestion. I think it was lightly put to me that maybe this is too fast.
It was like bom, like that level of speed. I can't even sing it because it was so like like that for like 2 minutes, and we decided that might be a bit intense. So I think we halved it or something. We like properly slowed it down.
I remember when you first brought the song to me. This was the first one that we worked together on. I sort of like came in and we just started talking about working together, and they were like, this is the song that we want to start with. And I was like, where did that riff come from? And Ed said that he'd been listening to a lot of Primus at the time. He said it was his sort of take on
Primus too.
riff as well.
Brilliant. That's great. I mean, it works so well. It's such a great bass line, and it's so hypnotic and kind of draws you in into a story, really. You know, you start telling us about this guy who's lifting weights and stuff. Where did that all come from? I mean, when you put words to a Pushpin song, I mean, it sounds like you love exploring and playing with sound, and you love kind of how an instrument or being in a particular place can lead you to start a song. But then when do you start thinking about words, and whose role is that? Is it Arthur's?
Yeah. So essentially, whoever sings it kind of writes the words. So if Ed's got a line, he's writing the words for that one. And we feed back to each other. You know, we go through them together. This song was really refined. So at the time, Adam lived in Rochester, above a tea shop, like in a flat above a tea shop, and we had to play very softly to not upset the people in the tea shop. So we jammed around on that groove for just ages and ages and ages. So the lyrics and even the vocal line just didn't come out immediately because we were so in that groove all the time.
I'm fascinated by the idea that you were rehearsing above a tea shop, but you had to play quietly in order to not rattle the china. That's how I'm imagining it. That suddenly you go into, you can't resist, and you go into the dance and make a right racket, and then suddenly all the cups are shaking, and you're getting one of the people running up and saying, "Stop it! Don't do this to us."
I think that exactly happened only once. Yeah.
It did happen. It's like you were there, John. That's exactly what happened. We had this.
You in the tea shop? Is that what happened?
Yes. Can't beat Rochester for a cup of tea. What else should we hear about Walk In, Walk Out? So we've kind of discussed the bass line and the but there's a lot of other elements.
There's that kind of synth, that main synth hook that came out in those rehearsals above that tea shop in Rochester. And I think it took a lot of work to find that sound, and it involved things like hurdy-gurdies, involved pretty much every synth preset you can imagine to find that kind of, that lovely sound you get there.
From my perspective, I think the way I remember, we recorded quite a lot of different versions of this riff. Adam kept coming back to me and being like, no, I want a different sound. And I'm usually one for layering, but we kept adding more and more. And then I was just like, just go back to there was this one sound that he had. And I think it was the first or second. And I was like, that is the one. And then we compromised and ended up adding all of the background synths. We spent like a full day together, sort of just building up this sort of rhythmic sound world. But I was like, it has to just, for me, I just wanted it to cut through, and I think that he really managed it with this one.
And in terms of recording the tracks, Joe, were you presented with these are the songs, these are the tracks we've recorded. Your job is to try and bring it all together and make it work, or did you go in and record things with the band as well?
It was a little bit of both. I engineered the whole thing as well. So when the band presented me the songs quite like a sort of arrangement wise, quite a finished state. Like I think that they knew a lot of the stuff that they wanted to do, and I think my favorite thing about working with Pushpin is just there's so many ideas floating around all the time. So I think that I was more there to be a bit of a lens to sort of focus ideas down, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, so I mean, really, when you got Joe involved, you're already quite far down the line of having everything arranged and these songs written and ready to go. So your question is, how do we record them? What's the best way of making these songs sound as good as they possibly can?
So we first started working on Walk In, Walk Out, and the plan was to sort of do a single, see how it goes, maybe go from there. And then we were like, maybe let's just dive in. And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And then they sent me a Google Drive folder of about 50 songs. And they were like, this is everything we've got. And I was like, amazing. And I spent like 2 hours listening through the whole thing. There was some stuff that we changed quite a lot, some stuff that we kind of just left alone and were like, this is great as it is, and we want to present it in its purest form. But then there were quite a few where we sort of worked at it as we went along. I think that the process of pulling out the threads of the tapestry was continuous.
And the next song we're going to look at from the EP is Sequoia. So maybe we should go straight into it and hear a blast of the master of this.
Sitting in the shade, the roots weave and dance to feed the dogs.
It is Sequoia by Pushpin, another song that starts intimately and builds to a crescendo, but in a different way to the ones that we've listened to already. And there's some great sounds and great noises, and there's a guitar line in there. So would that suggest that this might have started with guitar, or did it start with that amazing sound, that kind of crunchy, white, noisy sound that runs through most of the song?
So that's actually the bass.
Is it?
The kind of guitar,
that
yeah.
kind of...
oh no, sorry. The guitar sound is the bass.
The guitar sound is the bass.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Okay.
But all those kind of soundscapes and like bubbling synths and stuff was something we kind of from the outset wanted to achieve with this, and like make it sound really naturalistic and organic. And that's something we spent a lot of time working on with Joe for this track in particular. For some reason, I'm reminded of a band called Mouse on Mars. I don't know whether you've ever heard of them. A duo from Germany, but some of the sounds in Sequoia really remind me of Mouse on Mars.
It was again in that like one of those couple of Rochester weekends, and Arthur was playing those loops over and over again, and they were so cool. And he was using his pedal to kind of slide and switch the harmonies up, make it kind of random. And so I jumped on the drums eventually, and I've got a bit of a habit of when I find a drum beat that I think is good, I will say it's the greatest thing that anyone's ever done on planet Earth, and I will just keep shouting that. And I remember, and I still, to this day, I've said a lot of things that I don't agree with, but to this day I back that.
Well, I think we should hear the drum beat now, as it's the greatest thing you've ever created, Lawrence.
There you go.
Yeah, big
It's
words.
the greatest thing that humankind has ever created.
Okay.
Stop.
So here it is. Which, this sounds pretty, very groovy. And then, John, to your point of all the spooky stuff underneath it, we've got all these little sounds underneath that are sort of filtering around. So, and then on top of that, you bring in a little like pulse as well. So you can keep sort of time of where you are. And then here are the violins. Hopefully that loops. Let's see if that loops. Yeah. So that's sort of the core of the song with the bass line as well, in these sort of chorusy bits. So here's the bass.
And the recordings that we're hearing now, were they made above the tea shop, or were they just written there and then re-recorded?
So actually, a lot of the ambient sounds at the start they came out of. It was a bunch of voice notes that Arthur sent me. The start was originally quite different. It was based around this sort of like single note ostinato that was everyone was kind of playing around, and then we wanted to find a way to make it a little more interesting. And so Arthur started going through his phone, and we were talking about what the song's about. Sort of this idea. It's sort of like a bit of a apocalyptic rebirth. Arthur had this image of like a tree burning in his mind, and this idea of like rebirth after a forest fire. He'd been working on a play at the time where he'd been making a lot of like sound loops and it was looking at a similar theme. So I was like, why don't we just use some of that? And so we just took those and we faded them in and out. We just wanted it to be kind of this quite brittle thing, something that sort of can move around and be a little bit unstable.
Yeah, I mean that's quite conceptually. It's quite big, isn't it? Apocalyptic rebirth. I mean, you could have called the EP that, if you wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. So I was reading a book about climate activism and how the science behind forest maintenance. This is very nerdy, but the idea that we used to clear up all the leaves and sort of detritus on a forest floor because that's what catches fire, but also by doing that, all the trees in those forests would often die because it's actually the rotting of that into the soil that provides the nutrients for when there is a forest fire for new trees to grow. And so it's a very good example of like human, like us learning more about how to maintain the world better a bit. And then I was doing a play based on all those things, a big dance piece, and had loads of sounds I'd made that sound like trees, but they were just like me hitting things. And so this loop here was sort of one of those bits that I really wanted to get into the song. And Joe and I were like, should we record it again? And then we just ended up just putting it in. So it's all these it's like a violin loop. And it's sort of stretched and warbly, like the sound of like a tree creaking in the wind. So that's sitting underneath. If you unmute, it's sort of in the verse. 2 dozen redwoods sort of hiding in the background there.
The play that you mentioned, Arthur, is this you're creating the music for the play? Or are you more involved in the play itself, or the writing of the play?
So one of my best friends, she's called Roots. She's a sort of director, writer. She does lots of plays. And I normally just sort of rock up and go to some rehearsals and write a lot of music to go along with it. But it's quite early stages. So that's why I was sort of thinking a lot about the ideas. It's not sort of like, here's a script, I need a music cue here. It's a lot more sort of, this is what we're trying to achieve. Can you write some things and then I can play off them? So that's why that all that's how that all comes together. There's a really cool bit in this song as well I really want to get to, because it's just like my favorite thing of the whole EP, which is the ending. So the ending was essentially, so on the violin you can double stop, which is just you play 2 strings at once. I don't know why it's called that. That's what it's called for some reason. But because I have this pitch shifting pedal, you can introduce like harmonies, and it's designed for guitar, so you would play in sort of fifths on the guitar. It's quite math rocky, but you can slide between the things, as Lawrence said. So what that means is you can essentially play 4 notes at once if you're playing 2 notes to begin with, and then you can slide around with them. And so above the tea shop in Rochester, we were jamming around, and we came up with these chords. which were really angular and weird, and we would never have written ourselves if we hadn't just done it through the pedal. And so we recorded these separately off the back of the pedal. But if I find all the other bits, so you can sort of hear how it all starts to stack up together with these big walls of violins, and then we've got the brass that we then put on the church over it, with an amazing saxophone solo from that. And that's what really led to that apocalyptic ending, because that sounds like an orchestra to begin with, right? But once you bring everything in, it's pretty massive.
I think with that one as well, on the track before, we didn't talk about the soprano saxophone, but we decided to include a soprano saxophone because it has like a really amazing timbre. It's kind of different from a normal saxophone. It has this like fresh, I guess it feels a bit more woody, and it also means that an amazing player like Nat can just like flit around the octaves, and it feels like really otherworldly. And we had the same at the end of Garden Is Nice as well, both kind of like nature themed songs. And it's lovely to have this like instrument like burst out of nowhere, and this kind of like weird birdy saxophone thing. So that's what you just heard in that.
Can I ask, like, because I don't know when I'll get the opportunity again, can we just listen, just for me, can we just listen to that sax solo just on its own, please? Because it's the best thing in the world.
Let's do it.
Because I had to nip out while they were recording that for about an hour during that day, whilst they were doing that, and I came back and everybody just, as I entered the church, everybody was just sort of crowding around like with the headphones, like Adam, listen to this, and I just stood there in the middle of this church like.
We told him to really, put his foot down on the pedal, you know. And he responded in the best possible way. Yeah, I actually bumped into him the other day, and he said he was really glad to hear that he made the cut. He said that he wasn't sure if it was going to be used. He thought it was too mental, but I was like, no, it was. We weren't gonna take that.
It does sound amazing. We should give him a full name credit in this episode, I think. So,
Nat Phillips.
Nat Phillips. Yeah.
That was a good call, Adam, to get to hear that solo. I mean, there's so many great elements. I mean, it's almost like you need a sister EP, but with isolated individual tracks. No, I think that would be an interesting thing to listen to.
Honestly, one of the hardest things working. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, you go, Joe. Go for it.
I was just going to say one of the hardest things working on this was just knowing what to cut, because there were so many versions of what could have been the song. Because as I said about how many ideas are floating around, it was just the process of, I don't know, we had to be quite disciplined about what we wanted the song to be saying. It was never a process of being like, what doesn't work. It was just like, what's the translation we want to be public, you know. There could have been quite a few different versions, I think, of every song.
Yeah, it must be really tricky, especially because, you know, working with the songs and performing the songs live, you know how you can do them one particular way, but you also know of the other possibilities too, and you're kind of having to make different kinds of decisions. You know, what will be on the record? What will we be able to perform live? You know, and it's tricky, especially when you are so ambitious and you have so many great and exciting ideas. You know, how to make those choices. It's like you're kind of killing off your babies at every stage.
That's why we had Joe involved, I think, partly just, as he said, like a lens to filter it through. Because I think otherwise we would have had a million trillion ideas, and I think it's really useful. You know, sometimes when you stack things on top of each other, it kind of actually makes them all less as impactful. So being able to have someone who says, look, we're just going to have the sax solo at the end, and kind of that's the thing that's going to stick out, is super useful for us.
I think as well, it definitely went both ways. I think that from the start, I was very much like, this is a collaboration. I think that my ideas shouldn't hold any more precedent than anyone else's, and I tried to make that as clear as possible. So I think that there were definitely a few times where the band were like, no, your idea's the wrong one, and I'm really grateful that we were able to have that dialogue. You know? I think that it meant that we were able to hold each other accountable, which is always a healthy thing in the process.
The EP has 6 tracks. Was it a problem sequencing them?
I think it was like quite. It's almost an EP of 2 halves, like, which is kind of crazy to say about an EP because it's not very long. What essentially happened was the first 3 songs felt like sort of groovy soundscapey, but quite upbeat, or at least having some sort of like positivity around them in sort of quite a like direct way. And then we had Dog, which is sort of an a cappella track, so it felt like a really good break from that because it's quite intense. And then the last 2 songs are a bit grander and a bit more emotionally cathartic and intense, so, and also a bit more orchestral in the way they sort of climax at the end. So it actually was quite easy to sequence, luckily, because of that. But there is like no doubt a million versions of this EP with slightly different songs on it, slightly different structure, you know, where it was all done in a flat instead of in a church.
And we tried to say quite a lot. Oh, sorry, go on.
Go, no, you speak, Joe.
I was just going to say, I think that we knew we wanted to say quite a lot with this collection of songs, and I think that we tried to be quite disciplined about how they all fitted together from the start. I think we tried to let it be a bit of a story rather than like let the songs sort of reflect off each other and be a contrast rather than sort of have 6 of the same song. But I think we managed to just about cram as much as we could into 6 songs.
Well, it's a great reflection of the band, and as somebody who's seen you perform a few times, you know, it seems to have a lot of the elements that you get to witness at a live show, and also the whole sequence of it does take you on a little bit of a narrative, even though, you know, you, as you've explained, it's in kind of 2 halves in a way. But the great thing about a Pushpin live set and this EP is that there are a lot of different things going on, and you take the audience in quite a few different ways, and you give them all this many-sided, imaginative, idea-rich experience, which is one of the reasons why you're such an engaging live band, and I think that maybe that's why you've cleverly called the EP just Pushpin, because it does seem to sum up a lot of what Pushpin is about at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's funny because we recorded this a couple of years ago, and that was after a lot of these songs were actually played live for quite a while, because we, especially in the older days, we used to gig a lot. So it's really funny releasing this kind of really maximalist style now that 2 years later we've actually distilled a lot of it down into kind of slightly simpler arrangements and like simpler new song. So it's kind of, it feels like the biggest expression of us, but also an expression of us that was, I guess, slightly older than what we're doing right now, which I guess is the way it always works.
To think that these were recorded 2 years ago, you must have been kind of getting quite anxious about getting them out into the world in their recorded versions.
Yeah, we've got entire fans who know, like entire sections of fans who know these songs. So it's really nice to be able to say, oh yeah, we're going to finally release this to you. And especially the one where everyone's like, where's the one with the bass tapping? And then we release Walk In, Walk Out. So, oh, there it is. So it's nice to be able to kind of finally give our like fans that gift, really.
Yeah. That's great, and you are showcasing this at the Moth Club on the 16th of November. I guess you've played all of these songs live. I mean, have you played them in the sequence that they're in on the EP?
We've not, and we're currently debating on the set list whether we're going to do that, because Garden, which is the last song on the EP, is such a good closer. We're a bit like, we want to put that at the end of the set, but we want to open with the EP. So yeah, we really want to, but we're now like currently like trying to go. Is that the best way to play them live? But we're just really excited to do all of them at once in the show.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, a 6-song set is a kind of nice punchy number, but then if you've got more time, maybe you could do the two halves and put a load of other songs in the middle of the two halves. I don't know.
That's actually our set list sorted. Thank you, John. Let's just do that.
I'm here to help. No. You've played an awful lot of shows in the short time that you've been gigging as a live band. I think you first started gigging in June of 2021. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you've done 99 shows, including Glastonbury this year. And it clearly you've been honing your live set and thinking about it and working at it a lot. And you put an awful lot into the performance. You've thought about, moments when some members of the band, like Adam, have a bit of downtime, then suddenly he has to create a puppet show to fill that time with positive creativity and activity. But it makes you really, really stand out, and no matter where you go, I would have thought heads would turn when Pushpin start playing.
The music is obviously like quite introspective a lot of the time, and we talked about the lyrical themes and how we write it all together in sort of in tiny spaces in very intense periods of time, which we love doing. But then taking that to an audience, it's kind of like its own art form of like entertainment, and writing that line between, because we're quite goofy people in a way, we like make a lot of jokes and we're very silly, and then we have that serious side, and we want to kind of show both sides to people in a live context. So like, because we don't want to like have a facade where we all come across as like sort of really edgy when we're not. We're actually like very silly people. So it's all about finding that balance where we can convey the emotion of the songs, but also convey just how fun it is to perform together and how much we enjoy it, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big takeaways from a Pushpin live experience is joy. You just fill people with joy, I think.
Thank you, John. That's very kind.
Yeah, thanks very much.
It's
glad
true.
to hear it.
I think we like the idea of theatre, and I guess that comes off on the EP, where you have these ridiculously huge sections with, churches full of brass instruments, and then you have these sections that's just Arthur really delicately into the mic. And I think our dream show is to capture like all those ranges of emotion that you can feel when you go to a live show. I think our ideal dream is to capture all that stuff in 30 minutes.
Tricky business. But you've been working at it, and I would say you're experts at it now.
Thank you.
It's been brilliant to be able to talk to you about the new EP. As you know, I'm a big fan and I love the EP. I think it sounds fantastic, and it's been great to be able to do this Fake Notes episode to find out more about it. Thank you for supporting Tape Notes and X-Posure on Radio X. You're the kind of people who inspire me to want to continue to make Tape Notes and play music on the radio, because it's always so exciting when you stumble upon a group as fantastic as yours with random conversation, because we met in a pub, didn't we, by chance, and got chatting and look at us now, we're making radio and podcasts together, which is really exciting. We should go out with one more song, another selection from the EP, and I have kind of suggested that Dog would be a good thing to play next, because it shows another side of the band and shows these brilliant harmonies that you create, and the a cappella dimension of Pushpin. It seems to me multi-dimensions and dynamics are two of the key ingredients in your approach to making your art. Would you agree?
I think so.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, Dog is pretty good at that. So that's
Dog is a great illustration of that. So is there anything else we need to tell people before we exit with Dog?
Just thank you, John. Thanks so much for chatting to us. We love your podcast and everything you do on the radio, so thanks so much.
Yeah.
My absolute pleasure. So here is the final selection then from the Pushpin EP. It is Pushpin with Dog.